So let's bring in Democratic Senator Jack Reed of Rhode Island to discuss all of this. He serves on both the Armed Services and Intelligence Committees. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Pam.
So how concerning is this? I mean, you know, the big question when something like this happens is, will this lead to a new arms race?
Well, that's a very serious question. First, there is evidence that the Russians did violate the treaty by deploying a system that was rendered illegal by the treaty. And our European allies, our NATO allies, have confirmed this. But the real problem, I think, is not just the INF treaty. The major treaty, the New START treaty, will expire in January 2021. If we don't have ongoing negotiations, if we don't engage and extend that treaty, then for the first time in many, many decades, there'll be no really arms control regime in the world at all to speak of. And that's not only a problem between Russia and the United States and China and the United States, it could give this sense of a license, if you will, for other powers that have been talking about developing nuclear weapons, in the Middle East particularly. So this is a very consequential event. I would have liked to see much more diplomacy applied to try to get the Russians to come back into compliance, to try to extend the treaty even further. But more importantly, we have to start focusing on the New START treaty, and I haven't seen no real diplomatic activity. I'm afraid it just might evaporate because no one paid attention to it.
And what's interesting is, in light of this, President Trump spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin earlier this week, and the president said that he didn't discuss exiting the treaty with Putin. He didn't discuss Russian election meddling, but he did discuss the wildfires in Siberia. What's going on here? What do you make of that?
It seems to be totally incoherent in terms of the dialogue. The Russian engagement in our election has been verified by the intelligence community with high confidence. The president should have been very clear that he cannot tolerate, on behalf of the American people, any interference with our elections. Also, this INF treaty, and again, the New START treaty, it would have been very, very helpful at that high level had the president engaged President Putin in a discussion about negotiations for New START, if we can continue. And essentially what New START does is put limits on nuclear weapons for Russia and the United States. Without those limits, there could be the arms race, but as I said, maybe even more importantly, there could be sort of a signal to other countries, there's no limits on nuclear weapons, you can get them. That would be tragic.
And speaking of, you have North Korea carrying out its third missile test just in 8 days. And the president put out a series of tweets, and they read in part, "These missile tests are not a violation of our signed Singapore agreement, nor was there discussion of short-range missiles when we shook hands." He goes on to say North Korean leader Kim Jong-un will do the right thing because he is far too smart not to, and he does not want to disappoint his friend, President Trump. So the president clearly downplaying this. Do you think the president is strengthening Kim's position? And also, what kind of a message does this send to our allies, U.S. allies in the area?
It sends a terrible message to our allies in the area because these missiles are solid fueled, which means they can be sort of set up for launch in minutes. They're mobile, so they can't be easily detected. They can reach our bases in South Korea within minutes, and they can reach Japan and other places equally quickly, or at least as quickly. So this is sending a message to our allies in the region is that we're not as interested in their security as we once were. That's one interpretation, which I think they'll draw. And this represents continued technical improvements by the North Koreans in their whole rocket fleet, their missile fleet, and their technology. And again, going back to
you're making the point, look, even though it may not be able to make it to the U.S., this is not something to be ignored because they're clearly making
progress, and that progress can also translate into technical aspects of intercontinental missiles, which would affect us. But I think the other factor is this Singapore agreement was this nebulous notion of we're going to work for denuclearization. We have not yet reached a suitable understanding with the North Koreans of what does denuclearization
What is that? How do you
mean?
define that? That is still an open question even to this day.
They claim it means they keep nuclear weapons. They just don't have as many as they had before. We say they have to give up absolutely all their weapons. We haven't even reached that conclusion.
Right, which seems to be part of the issue with the summit previously where they walked out. No deal was reached very quickly. John Ratcliffe, obviously, is the president's nominee to take over for Dan Coats at DNI. Do you think he's going to face some trouble in the nomination?
I think he's going to face appropriate concerns.
Getting confirmed, yeah.
The danger here is the president is attempting to politicize his office. Previous directors of intelligence were career professionals or people like Dan Coats. They had been ambassadors. He was an ambassador to Germany, long-term senators, knowledgeable, had no political agenda. He wanted to serve, and he did, serve the nation with integrity and commitment. Now you have someone who has very little intelligence experience, who is bought into the Trump line that all this was a witch hunt with respect to Mueller, which contradicts the intelligence community. And again, just in terms of qualifications as well as politicizing the office, this is a serious, serious concern for many of us.
All right, Senator Jack Reed, thank you very much.
Pam.